Hello and welcome. My name is Shamim Budanya. I'd like to welcome you to our Systems Thinking series, and it's my pleasure to take you through today our short segment on Introduction to Systems Thinking. So let's start off by having a look at this graphic and take a few moments to see what meaning you make out of it. What is the story and the narrative that is talking to you? So let's call these people the people at the front of the boat, and these people here sweeping the water out, the people at the back of the boat. On reflection, our first response is probably something like, wow, aren't these guys silly? The people at the front of the boat are going to be in danger as well. And yes, that would be our common sense reaction. However, what we tend not to see is that in many cases, we as actors in the world, in our organizations, and in our professional lives as well as our private lives, quite often we are actually these people at the front of the boat. So let's put it in perspective this way. Um, when we have managers who are overseeing workers, then quite often the managers see themselves as the front of the boat, and it's the poor workers who are making mistakes and aren't doing what they need to be doing. Alternatively, it's the strategists and the implementers, or it's government and citizens. We all tend to find ourselves on the front of the boat. Yet, when we look at a picture like this, our first judgment is of the people at the back of the boat. But having said that, ultimately, this picture, in a sense, is a shorthand for what systems thinking is all about. In that we can say that we are all in this together, that the whole is more than the sum of the parts, and we're looking at synergy. And that's essentially the storyline behind this particular picture. Now, let's take a look at this graphic. Here we have this gentleman. Let's call him John. John is a very successful manager in a large corporation, and John has achieved success because he is skilled and is very action oriented. And that's how many of us succeed in organizational lives, because we are problem solvers and we're action oriented. We see a problem and we act. And that's wonderful. However, what we sometimes tend to be oblivious of is the impact on our actions and how it reverberates throughout the system and comes back to harm us. So here's John sitting, and suddenly he gets hit by this little book or domino to his right, and he assigns that act of harm, inverted commas, quote unquote, that act of harm, he assigns it to something else because he hasn't understood the cause effect relationships that led to his initial action leading to this result. And this is a very simple example of what we call feedback in systems thinking. And the important thing about feedback is that our actions reverberate around the system and they come back and they influence the original action. So here we have John, who acted decisively, and in acting decisively, after a period of time, he feels the effects of his own action without realizing that it was his action that caused that reaction. Now, another perspective on this is that what you see here is that the action and reaction do not happen simultaneously. It takes time for the dominoes to fall upon each other, and there is therefore a delay before we see the outcome. So there's a delay between action and outcome, and this is another example, important aspect of systems thinking, is that cause-effect relationships are firstly distant in space, but they're also distant in time. And when we don't appreciate systems thinking, we tend to think that cause-effect relationships are close both in time and in space, and here we see certainly they're not. So let's take this a little further. Quite often, because of the time delays, actually, by the time the impact of the action reverberates around the system, John has been promoted, and he's now senior manager and general manager, and there's now somebody else sitting in his place, and let's say his name is Sipo. And suddenly Sipo feels this reaction, and our assignment is, wow, look at this poor Sipo. He doesn't even uh, achieve success, and he's barely been in the job for 3 months, and look at the mess he's created. Not realizing that it was actually John's action that led to Sipo's demise in this case, in this particular project context. And then if we just extend this a little further, while John is sitting here, unbeknownst to him, there's Bob sitting in another department, and suddenly Bob feels some kind of reaction that harmed his space, his system in some way. And unbeknownst to Bob, it was actually John's action that led to that. But because Bob's perspective is also limited in time and space, Bob just sees that as a random event that has impacted me. So this little picture gives some very, very powerful perspectives on key elements of systems thinking, feedback, delays in systems, oscillations, systems thinking as taking in complex systems, cause-effect linkages are distant in time and space. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you at our next in our next session. Thank you very much. Take care. Bye.